Hey everyone, this is Wyatt Jackson here with Adventures into Odyssey. This is the second episode of the Leonard Meltsner saga, and the second one I'll be reviewing. This is also the first three-parter I'm reviewing, so oh boy, it's gonna be a wild ride. So this is written and directed by Marshall Younger, and it originally aired October 8th, 2005. And so the AO Wiki has the summary. Eugene and Katrina Meltsner take a trip to visit a remote African village that believes... a remote African tribe that believes its village is under a curse. And the art is depicted on the album cover of Eugene and Katrina running across the bridge, which we'll come into later. So, this is a three-parter, and it has three separate promos. Some three-parters only have one promo for the entire thing. This one has three separate promos, which I'm grateful for. So, I'm going to also be talking about the cast and in these episodes. So, Eugene Meltsner is voiced by Will Ryan. Katrina Meltsner is Audrey Wojciechowski. Roy Blasig is voiced by Spencer Binford. Kwame is voiced by Trey Rogers. Amon is voiced by Puente Nichols. And Gobir Tucker Smallwood. So, yeah, I'm not going to get into IMDb credits or anything like that. I just want you to know the cast in these episodes. And yeah. But anyway, that's just the cast, so we have a pretty small cast. And so without further ado, I am going to roll the promo for this episode.
Travel to the jungles of Africa with Eugene and Katrina on an adventure you won't forget. It starts with a pleasant greeting from the pilot.
You go into that village, and you'll never get out.
An interesting observation from Eugene.
I don't think the parachute's working.
But things take a turn for the worse as Eugene and Katrina confront a village curse and follow the trail of a mysterious man named Moratti on the next Adventures in Odyssey.
Oh boy. Oh, okay. There's a lot to cover here. Oh boy. Where to start? Okay, so, first of all, the music was pretty good, but... Okay, so first of all, so the promo starts out with the pilot saying, "You're never gonna get out," which is true, that's part of the episode. And then, an interesting observation by Eugene, when Eugene says, "I don't think the parachute's working." The parachute works just fine. That's not even a plot point. It has nothing to do, almost, with the parachutes. The parachute doesn't... It's not about the parachute malfunctioning. The parachute works just great. Okay. So, that's the album promo. Not the best one I've heard, but okay, whatever. Let's get into the episode. So, we start off with scene 1, and Eugene is narrating on his computer. So he's typing it out, but he's talking because it's an audio drama, we have to hear it. And so Eugene's communicating his adventures with Katrina in Africa. And he's talking, and and then he's talking about this, it's very expositional, and then Eugene says, "My trip to Africa changed my life forever." And then, because this is a cold intro, and then we go to like an Adventures in Odyssey intro, and we get Mr. Whitaker doing the intro. Let's be clear about this. Mr. Whitaker is not mentioned in any of these episodes. They're in Africa. Like, Mr. Whitaker is all the way back in Odyssey, USA. This has nothing to do with Odyssey, Mr. Whitaker, or anything. Why couldn't they have done a Eugene intro? It's just so bad because, Mr. Whit has nothing to do with these episodes. He's not mentioned once, except for the intro. Okay, I'm moving on, because I don't want to get into a rant. So we go back to Eugene narrating on his computer. And so, we get some stuff that kind of relates to Novacom here. So before Katrina and Eugene came back to Odyssey from their travels around the world, they traveled for a missions board, appropriately named around the world missions. Around, that's awesome. Around the world missions. And so apparently Around the World Missions had a request for someone to build a communications tower in the Ashanti village. And so they picked Eugene. So he's going to be building this communications transmitter tower. And then Eugene and Katrina learn the Ashanti language. Okay, first of all, it says they learn the language in 3 weeks. It takes more than 3 weeks to learn a language. Second of all, they fluidly speak it when they're in this field. Like, if you somehow manage to learn a language in 3 weeks, you're not going to be fluid at it. You've never spoken it with anyone else. I mean, maybe Eugene and Katrina spoke it to each other. But, like, you can't learn a language and speak it fluently in 3 weeks. It's impossible. I think that's just a huge point they just brushed over. And then Eugene says, for the purposes of this recording or of this documentary, I'm not going to be discussing things in their native language. I'm going to be discussing them in English. So we don't exactly know what the original dialogue is, but somehow Eugene and Katrina study this language for 3 weeks, become experts in it, and they can just easily translate it between English and it doesn't make sense at all. And I feel like that's a point that's focused on the family just brushed over. Anyway, and so they took an airplane and they landed in Zaire, which is modern-day Congo. And I think that gets brought up in a later episode. But anyway, so then his narration kind of stops and we kind of get into the story. And so we go to a runway. So Eugene and Katrina are meeting with the pilot, and his name is Roy Blasig. Roy Blasig. That's a tongue twister. Blasig. What a name. Oh boy. Okay, so they're meeting with Roy Blasig, the pilot, and he's apparently American. And he's extremely superstitious about the curse. And so they're like, yeah, we're going to the Ashanti village. And he's like, you're going what? They're like, the Ashanti village. He's like, oh, yeah, you're gonna die there if you go. And they're like, oh, why? And he's like, haven't you heard of the curse? No. They just came here. And Roy's like, well, yeah, anyone who goes there never comes out. No one's been there since... Oh, I'm going to be giving away major plot points. Okay, yeah, okay. I'll get into this later. There's a major plot point here that's... I need to touch on, so... No one has been in this village since 20 years ago. Except for the people who lived in it. No one has gone in and came out. I mean, except for the one person, which I'll get into later. But, like, why would this pilot be superstitious? It's just a remote African village. Okay, whatever. So he warns them that they'll never get out alive if they go into the Ashanti village. He is very uncomforting and unreassuring. And so we go to Eugene and Katrina and the pilot in the plane, and he's telling them all about the curse. Very delightful fellow. Very undelightful fellow, actually. He's just like, yeah, well, okay, you're gonna die. Here's some parachutes. They're like, parachutes? He's like, yeah, you're not actually expecting me to, like, drop you off in the village. And they're like, what? And then so he picks up a parachute, and then he's like, oh, this one's broken. You would have dropped like a stone. And Eugene's like, huh, yeah, very delightful. And so it's going to be extra expensive for the cargo to have a parachute, and then it's like another $300, and the pilot's like, yeah, you're not going to be bringing them back because you're going to be stuck there forever. And, yeah, he's not very nice or reassuring. He's just like, yeah, you're going to die, so too bad for you. And so now we go to the sky, and they're Eugene and Katrina have jumped from the plane with their cargo, and their parachutes have deployed, and they're falling down. And Eugene is panicking, and Katrina is trying to reassure him, and they're both falling down, and then they hit. And super good sound engineering on this part. And so they hit the bottom, and the pilot dropped them off in a clearing, which is good. And then, so they're both kind of brushing themselves off when they see this boy there. And so Katrina tries to talk to this boy, and he runs away. And they're like, oh man, well, oh well. And then so the boy and his mom come back. And her name's actually Amon. And so she mistakes Eugene for someone named Marathi. And so they're like, it's Marathi, you've come back. And Eugene's like, what? And they're like, the curse is over, Marathi is back. And then so the boy goes to find his father, and Eugene's like, Marathi? Cursed? What? And then so, Eugene and Katrina are both super confused. And then, Amon is super nice, and she says to Katrina, oh, you're the second wife. And Katrina's like, what? And it doesn't make sense right now. It will in a minute, though. And so apparently this tribe has been waiting for Marathi to come back for many years. And Eugene is just like super confused, and they're both confused. And then to the boy, whose name is Kwame, he brings back his father, Gobir. And Kwame is like, look, the curse, it's over. Marathi is back. And then Gobir, the father, is like, the curse is not over. Because they didn't come over the river. And then, he says, like, I saw them fall from the sky. And Gobir's like, no, the curse isn't over. Like, get that idea out of your heads. Yeah. So anyway, Eugene tells them that he's going to build a tower for communications. And at this point, I was like, wait a minute. A tower. Like, I imagine it's like a 9-foot tall tower, which could be very easily what it is. Yeah, I think it's probably something like that. And so, once he's done building the tower, they can contact with anyone outside. And so Gobir reluctantly agrees to let Eugene build the tower. And so then we go to the field, and it's dark out. And there's a whole crowd of people here, and Eugene is just finishing installing the tower. And Kwame tells them that everyone's here to end the curse. And Katrina is very, how shall we say, uncultured. She starts talking to Kwame about God. And then obviously Gobir gets angry at her, and he says to her, don't you talk to my children. And she's like, oh, sorry, and all that. And so then Eugene announces that he's finished building the tower, and he gives this long, rambling speech about how this tower is going to help them, and everyone is super excited, and then they count down from 10, and they're all counting down, and then he flips the switch, and nothing happens. And he's like trying to say hello, 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 but nothing's happening. And then we kind of go out on Eugene's like, well, I'll fix it, whatever it is. And so then we go to a break, and then we come back, and we're in a field, and Eugene's still working on the tower. And he tried, and he failed. And Kwame's like, you're not, Marathi. Eugene's like, no. And he's like, I'm going home. And he walks home, and Eugene's super sad because he feels like he failed him. So, anyway, we go back to the tent, and Eugene and Katrina's tent, and Eugene's feeling like he failed the people, and Katrina tells him, yo, look, it's okay, like, there's no way we could have lived up to their expectations, and, yeah. And so Eugene asks the question, who asked the missions board for the equipment in the first place? Which is a super good question to ask, and it is a valid one. And Katrina says that it doesn't matter, they need it, and they need to put their trust in, like, God and not these idols. And then Eugene's like, yeah, but it's been apparent to me that they want nothing to do with us. And so then we go to the dining hall, apparently the next morning. And so Amon invited Eugene and Katrina to breakfast. And it is super awkward. It's just, this scene is so awkward listening to. And Amon made the breakfast, and Eugene and Katrina don't really know what to say. And they're like, it's just a really awkward moment. And then it's a storm coming, but yeah. And then there's rumbling, and then the rain comes, and then the lightning hits. And they realize that a hut is on fire, and so they all are panicking, and it's chaos, but they're all trying to get water to put the fire out. And so all the men go back and come back with water, except for Eugene, who's still there, and I'll get to him in a moment. So all the men go and put out the fire, and then Beer's like, the gods are not happy with us, all because of our new visitors. And then Eugene comes back sputtering, carrying the water, and Beer's like, we don't need your water. And Eugene's like, oh. And then he says to the village, it would be best if we all stay away from these people. And so he basically tells them to stay away. And so Eugene, it looks really bad on Eugene to not have him come back with all the rest of the village characters. I mean, yeah, it just doesn't look very great. And yeah, I don't know. It's not good. So we go to the next scene, and Eugene and Katrina are in a field and tent, and they're rationing beans because they don't know when the villagers will allow them in. The Ashantis will allow them in to eat with them or anything. And Eugene is blaming himself, and Katrina's not really comforting him that much. But he can't get the transmitter to work, and it's weird. And then we go. It's apparently a little like a few hours into the future, and we're still at the field and tower. And Kwame is with Eugene, the boy Kwame, but Eugene realizes he's missing a piece to the tower. And then Kwame asks him if he can make a piece. And then Eugene has a quote which I wrote down. So Eugene says, out of tree bark and coconuts? No, this isn't Gilligan's Isle. And Kwame's like, what? And Eugene's like, never mind. It's like, okay, Eugene, come on. This kid has lived in isolation for his whole life. He doesn't know circuitry. He doesn't know anything. And Eugene said coconuts? Coconuts? Really? Do coconuts grow in Africa? Oh, yes, they do. I stand corrected. So coconuts do grow in the Congo, it looks like. Okay, so anyway, Kwame is not afraid of being seen with Eugene, and then Eugene tells Kwame all about airplanes, and Kwame really wants to fly away from the village on an airplane. And then Eugene makes Kwame a paper airplane out of an old manual, and Kwame is super happy and runs off. And then we go to Amon and Eugene, and Amon is taking Eugene to an unknown place. And she says that her husband has a soft heart, but, sometimes he can be a little harsh. And she shows him Kwame and his friends, and they're all playing with paper airplanes they made from Eugene's manual. They're all super happy. And then she says, he's best friends with everyone today. I'm like, whoa, okay. Moving on. So Kwame is super happy, and he wants to fly away on a plane one day, and he won't be happy until he does. And then she says to Eugene that he reminds her of Marathi. And Eugene's like, oh yeah, I keep hearing that I look a lot like Marathi. Who is he? And then she's like, here you can... And then and then she takes him to Marati's hut because they kept it in his honor. And Marati means wise one. And he helps them to become more of a civilized society. And so they're in Marati's hut. He left them 20 years ago, and they've kept his hut in hopes that he would return. So Eugene finds a journal, and he looks in the journal, and there's a whole bunch of archaeological terminology. Then Eugene's like, okay, what was his name? And she's like, Leonard. And Eugene's like, what? And she's like, yeah, Leonard. And Eugene's like, oh no, oh my. And then Eugene puts the pieces together and realizes that Marathi is his father. And we go out on dramatic music. So, yeah, that is basically where the episode ends off. It is very much a one part of the story. And yeah, there's not even a proper outro. It's just like the dramatic music. So, the AO Wiki has a goof listed on the episode, which I'm going to read out. Okay, so it mentions Eugene and Katrina going to Zaire. However, at the time this episode was written, it would have been called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so they list this off as a goof, and yeah. Yeah, so Eugene says that he and Katrina visited the country of Zaire, but Zaire became the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1998. It was only known as Zaire from 1971 to 1997. So, yeah, the wiki has it listed as a goof. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, as every episode seems to have something that doesn't make sense. And another thing I want to briefly talk about is the wit intro on this episode. I know I talked about it earlier, but it seems so out of place and so just completely random that, I don't know. It just... why would you have a wit intro on this episode? It doesn't make sense. Oh. Anyway, this is a very plot-heavy episode. You see some of Eugene's, he's still very much a kid, and he can teach Kwame how to make airplanes, which is very nice. Yeah, very much a part one. Not much, and there's not much more I can say about it. So without further ado, I will be back next week talking about 575, Prisoners of Fear, Part 2. And yeah, something you can look forward to. So, I'll see you all next week. Goodbye. Adventures into Odyssey is a fan podcast by Wyatt Jackson. It has no affiliation with Focus on the Family or Adventures in Odyssey.